Alright, so this is a video about Godzilla Battle Line. If you're completely uninitiated, this is a mobile game featuring Godzilla characters. You send them against each other in PvP battles. Your goal is to defeat the enemy leader, and there's obviously more to it than that, but this is not like a review of the game or anything. This is a metagame discussion slash introduction. I'm gonna be honest, I'm kind of winging it here. You know, my last two videos did pretty good. So maybe, just maybe, with this video, I'll be able to reach some other people who care about this game, and I can finally be convinced that this isn't just a fever dream I've been experiencing. I'm not gonna discuss like mechanics or much of anything. If you're unfamiliar with the game, you're just gonna have to watch and observe, and I hope it will still be an entertaining video for you. So, this is the top tiers of Godzilla Battle Line. This is, I guess, just my personal picks. I'm gonna try and discuss as many of the sort of popular monsters I see, usually, and the ones I think are a little stronger than most. So to kick things off, I want to first talk about the new kids on the block, which for this season is Chibi Godzilla plus Chibi Mecha Godzilla. Yeah, he brought his pal this time. It's a good thing he did, because these two are really strong together. So these two have a lot of words to them. And I'm not gonna read all the words, but what you should know is that the more words a unit has, generally the stronger it is, because it means the more things they can do. And these two can do quite a lot. If I had to sum it up, I'd say that they are masters of chip damage. Godzilla can burn you, Mechagodzilla can stun you, Mechagodzilla can also distract you, and make it so that your guys are wasting time trying to fight him while the duo are piling on damage onto them. Not to mention, their HP is surprisingly good for what they might seem like, and they also have two methods of healing each other just built into them, in addition to whatever healing you give them. They'll stick around a surprisingly long time, and even if they don't, they're pretty easy to replace because they're only 4 cost. And 4 cost is like a golden number in this game. Basically everything that's relevant is like 5 or 6 cost, if not more. So being 4 cost already gives you an advantage because you can get the jump on your opponent with like a 4 cost unit. So the Chibi duo are pretty dang good, pretty dang annoying, but I wouldn't call them overpowered necessarily. Unlike their big cousin that they also invited to the function, Destoroyah Ariake version, whose gimmick is just doing more damage than everything around him. Destoroyah Ariake can deal double damage if the enemy is distracted, and when he does that, he also lowers their defense. And also, if they're a grounded enemy, he just does an extra 20% damage regardless. It's very easy to just pile on damage using this guy, especially because he's fast and he's 5 cost, so he's not difficult to place on the battlefield and just run up to a conflict and start wailing on enemies that are already distracted with whatever else you've put on the field. Or, you can just use a distracting unit like Chibi Mechagodzilla or Shinden, or just send fodder units along with Destoroyah, and then the enemy will focus on those, and Destoroyah can do his big horn katana. Man, if I had a nickel for every time a Godzilla video game made Destoroyah overpowered because of the horn katana. So, last season's big threat was definitely Thousand Year Dragon King Ghidorah. Yeah, I used his full government name there. Because he can unite his 3 heads together and deal triple damage to a single target. And for most of this game's life, it's been focused on big singular threats you can throw at each other. It kind of forced a lot of new ways to play where suddenly you had to now manage big groups that could mob Ghidorah and stop him from doing his big united attack, while also keeping them safe from splash damage dealers. We were seeing a lot of unique stuff. I personally liked the combo of Mothra and Megalon, because together they are cheaper than Gadora and are 2 targets for him to hit. Now, do they deal enough damage to deal with Gadora? Not necessarily, but it worked pretty well. What might have worked even better was what I call the Naranga tech. And by tech, I mean you just use Naranga. And the reason that works is because Thousand Year Ghidorah is actually really weak to stuns, as it turns out, and Naranga stuns things. Now, if you've been paying attention, you know who else stuns things is Chibi Godzilla. And so, the thing with Thousand Year Ghidorah in this season is that he's kind of hard-walled by the 2 new big threats. The Chibi duo are already 2 units, meaning he can't do a united attack against them, and Mechagodzilla will stun him to death. Meanwhile, as long as you distract Thousand Year Ghidorah with anything, Ariake Destoroyah can just run up and cleave him in half with the Horn Katana. So they kind of take advantage of 2001 Ghidorah's existing weaknesses, and so he's actually gone from like a major threat to like everything, to now just being, like, really good, but pretty really good. You know what I'm saying? But that's enough of new faces. Let's talk about the big cheese, the head honcho. The king of the kings is, maybe unsurprisingly, Godzilla. Specifically, -1 Godzilla. Because the best way to stop an incoming offensive push is, of course, to just delete it from existence. And that is what Godzilla -1 does. You can place him in water, which means you can place him farther forward than most other units. And when you do so, he becomes a landmine that has an absurdly high radius and damage output. And then once he's on the field, he's also just the best tank in the game, because he combines a good HP stat with regeneration. So it's really easy to just splash him on any team, throw him into the field whenever you want, and as long as the enemy is like sending offense your way, or if your offense and their offense are kind of deadlocked in the center, you can just throw in -1 Godzilla and suddenly you're at the advantage. All of their guys are getting scattered and chunked by the explosion. You can send things behind Godzilla and he'll take hits for them. Where's the downside? I mean, I guess the downside is if he's in the water too long, he doesn't do the explosion, but it's a long time you have to bait him out, and you don't know where your opponent puts him. It's not exactly easy to, like, bait. Godzilla -1, I've thought since his introduction has been #1 best. I think it'll take a real strong argument to convince me otherwise, because he just rules everything. You just put him down, you blow stuff up, and there's no counterplay. Except for Ariake Destoroyah, who can just sort of wait and then come in and then slice him in half like he does to everything, I guess. Anyways, let's talk about some other guys. Maybe not quite as good as the 4 I've mentioned, but still definitely up there and still definitely top tiers. Starting with Godzilla Earth. Godzilla Earth is big numbers the character. Big HP, big attack, but also big intervals between attacks and big 9 cost unit. So he's a little difficult to get on the field, and he won't be able to deal with faster attackers, or if you like desperately need to like save your leader. That's not what he's good for. But when he's on the field, once he's placed on the field, he commands attention. Especially because he has really good search range and will kind of like seek out a lot of enemies even if they're far away from him. He will make his presence known and just sort of become a threat to whatever offense you're trying to push forwards. And you also can't really chip him down too easily because
he does so much damage. He two-shots basically anything that comes at him, and especially does once his HP falls low and he becomes even stronger. So a little tough to use, not easy to just slap on a team, but definitely a meta threat, and with numbers like that, how can he not be? Now, here's a bit of a weird character, Fourth Angel, or as I will call him by his proper name, Sakiel. Sakiel is another big explosion character. This time it is an explosion on death, which is arguably easier to use than -1 Godzilla, because you can just put him in front of your leader, have your enemy offense attack him, he dies, he blows up, now suddenly your enemy's offense is crippled and you can finish them off with anything. Not to mention that Sakiel on his own does good damage. His only disadvantage is that he can't hit flying enemies, but against a grounded foe, he can out-damage a lot of them. He is kind of done in by enemies with self-destruct immunity, unlike -1 Godzilla. Self-destruct immunity is a thing that exists mostly to counter Sakiel, and also like burning Godzilla, I guess. But the thing with self-destruct immunity is there are 3 units in the game that have it, and none of them really want to fight Sakiel one-on-one. Tokyo Godzilla can manage, but the other 2 Evangelion guys will either lose the 1v1 or just simply can't deal enough damage to do anything, and then Sakiel gets to attack your leader and blow up on your leader, and that's even worse because it's so much damage. Also, the explosion is way larger than it has any right to be. Anything that isn't in like the top percentile of range fighting Sakiel will be hit by this explosion. Another unit, or I suppose an effect that's easy to slap onto a team that's very no risk, high reward, would be the Psychic Chorus. It is very straightforward. It is just healing. For a couple seconds, all of your monsters inside this ring will regenerate HP. Might not seem that great, but healing is like everything in this game, because every unit has a million bajillion HP and can sponge hits from everything. So having more HP to sponge more hits is really, really good. It's especially effective if you can, like, succeed a combat with the enemy. Your guys are on, like, mid HP and would easily get picked off, then you can just heal them and they'll be in tip-top shape. You can also heal a leader that has suffered chip damage from something, because some people think it's a great strategy to just throw bombs at the enemy leader all match. You can just use Psychic Chorus to prevent that. Psychic Chorus is really good. It's low cost, it's easy to use, there's no real downside. It's easy to play around something like Megalon. Yeah, if you're like losing and you have it unlocked, just use Psychic Chorus. The results will shock you. Anyways, next I'm going to talk about Final Wars Gyan, or Gyan 04. Gyan 04 is another just real easy to use unit. He's another stunning unit, and arguably the best stunning unit, because he can stun things from a million miles away for 2 seconds. For 2 whole seconds, that enemy just cannot do anything, unless they have stun immunity or are flying, because Gyan can't target flyers. And then Gyan gets to swoop in and also deal really good damage, because he does high damage and he has splash damage, so you can't even overwhelm him with swarms. He also attacks twice per hit, so he will cleave through things with like guard, like from Rainbow Mothra. Yeah, Gyan's really easy, very good at sort of like distracting an enemy coming in on offense. Oh, he's also 4 cost. He hits the golden 4 number. Gyan's really nice. He's good on offense. He's good on defense. He's good everywhere. Just don't send him up against a flying enemy, because they will just fly over him and damage him. Those are all units with like a lot sort of going on, like a lot of nuance. The rest of these guys are a lot simpler and like easy to explain why they're good, because like look at them. So, starting off, we have 2 characters that are basically variations of each other, which are Kiryu and Mogira. Specifically, regular Kiryu and Showa Mogira. And they're good because they do this. And obviously, in a game where you, for the most part, you have to place units on your side of the battlefield, having units that can go anywhere is really good, because you can just send them directly to your leader, and your enemy suddenly has to respond to that. Their stats are a little lacking to make up for this, but they definitely have their advantages and definitely will win games, especially if your enemy is not expecting them. In terms of the difference between them, Hiru does splash damage, which generally makes him better at targeting unevolved units, which can be very annoying for your opponent. Meanwhile, Mogira is cheaper, which generally makes him the better one at pestering the leader with damage throughout the course of a match. And also keep in mind that leaders will attack whatever's closest to them, so if you put Mogira right on top of them, you can just turn them around when you have other things targeting them and pile on even more damage that way. Speaking of Mogira, the other Mogira is also really good. This is mostly because of his buff. It is a recurring defense buff that will basically make everything around Heisei Mogira tankier, which is always nice, and it pairs well with Psychic Chorus. Not to mention Heisei Mogira himself, he hits the golden 4 number, and he also has good range, so he can snipe enemies from afar while continuously setting up his buff. Very strong support unit from Heisei Mogira. Next is Mothra. Regular bare bones Mothra is actually a really strong threat, I think, and that is because I've brought up multiple times the 4, the golden 4. Now, what's lower than a 4? That's right, 3. And Mothra just so happens to be a 3 cost unit. So if you want something you can very quickly play on the battlefield that has stats that can usually go toe-to-toe with an other unit, Mothra is your best bet. She has pretty good HP, good damage output. Also, her attack is a big string of multi-hits, which is great for tearing through the guards of things Rainbow Mothra has buffed, or an incoming Shinden, or anything like that. Plus, it's splash damage, so it hits multiple things. Mothra is very easy to just work with and throw down when, you know, you're in a pinch, or if you just need something to very quickly support your offense. And the last main threat, the last big top tier to talk about, is the regular version of Destoroyah, the evolving one. He has some disadvantages. He does require an evolution. Mothra requires an evolution too, which is a disadvantage for her. Regular Destoroyah is also 7 cost. He's pretty pricey, kind of hard to play, especially during the late game. But when your offense stat looks like this, kind of hard not to be a top tier. Regular Destoroyah, maybe not having the overwhelming power of Ariake Destoroyah, can still deal some big damage while sponging a lot of hits. His evolution's pretty easy because it's split into 2 15-second halves. Kind of hard to go wrong with regular Destoroyah as long as you're good at sort of being patient and saving up your energy well. Alright, those were all the units I consider to be the top tiers. That was 13 units right there, but I consider to be, the top 13 basically. But I do want this to be an open discussion, so we're going to do a lightning round here of other units I consider to be really good and that maybe some other people might consider to be better than I rate them. So, both Biolantes are pretty good. Regular Biolante is a tanky 3 cost unit that can spread a lot of damage in a big area. Meanwhile, the Wakasa Bay Biolante can very easily wear things down using her acid and her secondary attack that triggers automatically. Fukuoka Space Godzilla can pester the enemy by sending crystals at them from all the way across the battlefield, and his range gets surprisingly long if there's a string of enemies next to him because the beam jumps from enemy to enemy. Speaking of 6 cost units that can hit a lot of things, Kiryu Heavy Arms, Super Mecha Godzilla, and 2001 Godzilla are all 6 cost units that hit a lot of things at once. That's their gimmick, that's what they're good at. They all have secondary effects on top of that, but that's the main thing you use them for. The Shinden is kind of a weird unit, but it's really cheap, and it will distract things as it flies by, which is especially good now because it pairs well with Destoroyah Ariake and makes it so that it'll trigger his Horn Katana. The Dimension Tide and the Unmanned Train Bombs are basically just free damage. The Train Bombs are just damage, whereas the Dimension Tide is a little bit more expensive, but you can control your enemy's positioning using it, which is really nice. Pairs well with splash damage units. Godzilla Wakasabe is a bit of a weird character, and maybe not the best, but I think he has a lot of potential. He's high cost, but he's also very high damage, and the automatic nuclear pulse you get is also really useful, especially with its knockback. It can be used defensively. He has some downsides, but overall his damage output's really good, so I think he deserves a mention. And lastly, there are the Kamacuras and the Dorats, which are similar to the Shinden. They're cheap, sort of distracting fodder units. They don't have the compel effect, they don't have the guard of the Shinden, but they are multiple targets, which is great for slowing down, especially 2001 King Ghidorah and other sort of like slow attackers, especially slow single target attackers. Not a whole lot of them are really like top tier, but if you run into them, this is why you want like Kamacuras or Dorats. They're both pretty good. Dorats got buffed recently, so I'd put them about even with each other, and they're pretty easy to fit on a team. Alright, that is basically all I wanted to say for this video. As mentioned, I do want to encourage discussion here. If you play Godzilla Battle Line, you have some thoughts on who the top tiers are, I'd love to hear them. If you agree with my takes, if you think maybe my ordering should be a bit changed, if you think some of the guys I discussed here are a little overrated, if you think maybe there's someone I didn't bring up who deserves to be ranked higher, I want to know. And maybe if this video does well, I'll do more like it, and maybe we can even do a big community tier list at the end of the month when the season's over. If you want to pick up Godzilla Battle Line, it's free. It's pretty fun. It's especially fun if you're a Godzilla fan like me. Give it a try, see if you like it. Don't spend money on it if you don't want to, and hope you all have a wonderful time. Also, I'm a fake fan. I haven't seen the new Godzilla X Kong movie.